Shalom. Giving all praises to the Heavenly Father, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai Bahasham, Rachahakwarash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders at Great Millstone who rule well. And as always, we give peace and salutations unto the elect. And I wanted to do a lesson responding to a talking point in the Apostles Street Ministry Live from this past weekend, August 9th, 2025. In the beginning of the video, you can watch it, GMS Apostle Street Ministry. That's where they post their live shows. In the beginning, they were talking about a debate between Tazariak and some Edomite Christian, which I didn't happen to see it, but they talked about how, the topic was polygyny or polygamy, and the Edomite Christian, or what seemed to be an Edomite, basically said, since the United States of America says you can only have one wife, by having two wives, you would be basically breaking Romans, the 13th chapter. All right. And I'm not gonna so much get into the topic that they were debating, but what I want to talk about is how many of these Christians and many of these Israelite camps are going to use, all right, Romans, the 13th chapter as a means to push the notion that you should obey the government in a sense, that what they force or, particular legislations. Now, we know when you are driving, you stop at a stop sign, you don't run the red light, you do these things to the best of your ability. You don't go out, you can't stone a homo. There's a lot of laws of the land that we do keep, to the best of our ability. We pay our taxes, we don't steal, we don't, there's particular laws of the land that you can't keep. But when you deal with Romans, the 13th chapter, as we'll get it, all right, just looking at that video at the bottom of this one, 300,000 black men. When you actually deal with Romans, the 13th chapter, all right, because I was also looking at a video where, RFK is talking about a universal vax that Americans are going to have to take. So pretty soon, this government is going to be, passing laws and legislations telling us we got to do this, we got to do that. And many of these preachers are going to use the book of Romans, the 13th chapter, as a means to say we ought to obey the government. Now, we know we have many examples of our forefathers being, faced with orders from rulers that they didn't follow. One that comes to mind is Daniel and the three holy children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the Neo-Babylonian captivity. They were forced with bowing to Nebuchadnezzar's image, all right, and they didn't, okay? Here, we're going to be forced with bowing to the image, taking the mark, and these are things we're going to say no to, okay? But you're going to have preachers, all right, that just like during the COVID situation, you had preachers who were used as pawns to tell their congregations that they have to do it. A lot of them were getting paid, all right, and this concept here in Romans, the 13th chapter, was used. Now, when you get Romans, the 13th chapter, all right, Paul is speaking of being subject to government, okay? Now, you have to ask yourself, why was this written? Okay, if you know the history between the Jews and the Roman Empire, there were many uprisings and rebellions surrounding taxes. Okay, as a matter of fact, here in the book of Matthew, the 22nd chapter, okay, the wicked scribes and Pharisees and, chief priests, as you can see here, Matthew 22 and 15, taxes for Caesar, tribute to Caesar. And we'll read this in the NLT. It says, then the Pharisees met together to plot how to trap Yahushua into saying something which he could be arrested. So look what they asked him And why would this get him arrested? It says they sent some of their disciples along with the supporters of Herod, the Herodians. A lot of the Herodians were Jakes who supported Herod. Okay, it says to meet him. All right, so they sent, some of their disciples and some of the supporters of Herod, which was, the ruler over Judea at that time, what they called Judea, to meet him. And they said, "Teacher, we know you are honest. You teach the way of God truthfully, and you are impartial and don't play favorites. Now tell us what you think about this. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" Yahushua knew their evil motives. Now, what were their evil motives? To get him to say something that would get him arrested. Because you have to understand, in the Roman Empire, all right, there is a history of Jews rebelling against taxes and actually going to war with the Romans over taxes. And Yahushua knew their evil motives and said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Here, show me the coin used with the tax." They handed him a Roman coin, and he said, "Whose picture and title are stamped on this coin?" "Caesar's," they replied. Well, then he said, "Give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give unto God what belongs unto God." His reply amazed them. They went away. Okay, now what I did was here I asked, were they trying to trap Yahushua up in Matthew 22, asking about taxes so that they can paint him as a mover of sedition? Yes, exactly. In Matthew 22, 15 through 22, the Pharisees and Herodians weren't asking a casual theology question. They were setting a political trap designed to get Yahushua branded as a rebel against Rome. All right, and this sets the stage for Romans, the 13th chapter, because Paul pretty much passed down the same order. Okay, the Pharisees disliked Roman rule and feared losing their position. The Herodians supported Herod's dynasty, which was pro-Rome and pro-tax. Together, they asked, is it lawful to pay, taxes to Caesar? This was a loaded question. If Yahushua said no, he can be accused of sedition, just like Judas the Galilean, and handed over to Roman governor. And you can see Luke 20 and 20. Somebody can post that on a comment board. It says they wanted to deliver him to the power and authority of the governor. As a matter of fact, I want to get it, Luke 20 and 20, to see what it says. Luke 20 and 20 says, watching for their opportunity, the leaders sent spies pretending to be honest men. They tried to get Jesus or Yahushua to say something that could be reported to the Roman governor. All right, that's pretty much the same scripture that we looked at, but we'll look up this Judas the Galilean as well, because I remember some history on him. But he was a mover of sedition, and actually, I believe, led a rebellion against the Romans over taxes. So many of the Jews were leading rebellions against taxes. If Yahushua said yes, all right, he'd lose credibility with the Jews who view paying taxes to Rome as betraying God. All right. Why sedition was the real goal? Under Roman law, advocating against payment of taxes was considered treason. Judas the Galilean's fate showed what happened to people who opposed the tax and execution. People who opposed the tax were executed. They wanted to paint Yahushua as a dangerous political agitator, making it easier to arrest him by Roman authorities instead of just religious charges. This tactic later shows up in his trial in Luke 23 and 2. They accuse him before Pilate, saying, "We found this man." This is what the wicked chief priests, scribes, Pharisees, Herodians, and so forth were saying about Yahushua. "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute unto Caesar." You see that? Notice they lied, since Yahushua never forbade paying taxes. He didn't say don't pay your taxes. He said give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's. Okay? So by the time you get, yes, so yeah, so basically we got that. So by the time you get to the book of Romans, the 13th chapter, all right, you have the Apostle Paul, okay, giving the church an order on how to deal with this amidst all of these uprisings and rebellions that were going on. So let's read it. Romans, the 13th chapter, okay, in the first verse. Everyone, NLT, everyone must submit to governing authorities. And you submit to governing authorities when you go to work, all right, when you pay your taxes, when you're following the law of the land, when you're not going out and being an asshole. Now, under the U.S. Constitution, we have the right to go out and practice our free speech and freedom of religion by going out to the highways and the byways. We're not going against the government in that stake. Now, our gospel goes against their interest, but overall, we're not breaking the law, which they're getting ready to pass laws saying that what we're doing is breaking the law. But as for now, all right, we're granted that opportunity. We're granted that right. So we're not disobeying the government by teaching the word. But again, even in Rome, there came a point where doing what the disciples were doing was looked at as treason, and eventually they were kicked out of Rome. So he said, everyone must submit to the authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. And how do we know that? Well, you get Daniel, the 7th chapter. See? Rome, or the fourth beast, was prophesied to rule. Daniel 7:7, and I saw in the night visions, behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. So this was ordained by the Most High via prophecy that the Romans would rule. It's ordained by the Most High via prophecy that America would be in rulership. So we are not given the right to fight against that authority, in which this is what Paul is talking about, man. Anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God instituted, and they will be punished. Okay, so again, what does he mean by rebelling? Let's look up this word in the King James. It says, whosoever therefore resisted the power, resisted the ordinance of God. So let's look up this word resisted so we can see what this is really talking about. Okay, antitasso. Okay, to range and battle against. See that? This is what Paul was warning against. He ain't saying that whatever the government says you got to do, you do it. That's not the understanding of Romans, the 13th chapter, because we were what? Forbade from bowing to the idols of the heathen. Okay, many of the followers of Yahushua were put to death because they did not bow to the idols of the Romans. See that? So this is speaking of ranging in battle against, opposing oneself by resisting and opposing, okay, and forming a military. And this is what many of the Jews were doing, okay, ranging in battle against, okay. Anti is, all right, basically to oppose, all right, and you have tasso. Okay, tasso, all right, to arrange, and basically you're forming a military. Okay, you're forming a military, man, to oppose the Roman authorities. And this is a history of what happened with the Jews in the Roman Empire. So Paul is saying whosoever rebels or resists in the sense of forming a military against the rulers of Rome, all right, you are resisting the Most High. We are not justified in forming a military against America. We're not justified in forming a military against Rome. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal. Okay? It says, for rulers are not a terror, all right, are not a terror to good works. They're not going to stop the truth, but we are subject via prophecy to be under their authority. Just like in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, you had many rulers saying, we're not going to submit unto the Babylonians, and they got rolled on. They lost. You have a Israelite named Ishmael in the, I believe, in the book of Kings, who didn't want to submit, and Jeremiah, all right, was warning him, and eventually he lost. Okay, you got these guys with this zealot mentality. That's what the Sicarii were in ancient Rome. They were zealots. They fought against Rome. They even put to death particular sellouts, people who they deemed to be sellouts. They would, put the sword to them. So these were, things that the Yahweh church was never founded upon these things, and Paul is just reinforcing it. All right, for authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but in those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without fear to the authorities? Do what is right, and they will honor you. Again, the scriptures say, when a man's ways please the Lord, even his enemies are at peace with them. Even when the police come up to us and we start talking to them, all right, when some commotion breaks out, the police always says, man, y'all are some upstanding men. Y'all are all right. They say y'all are crazy, but talking to y'all seem, the cop roll up, hey, how you doing? Yada, yada, yada. We state our position. Now, they know what we teach. We ain't backing down from what we teach. But at the end of the day, we're not given the right to wage in battle against the Roman authorities, man. And you have to be wise when you're in the position or in the face of one who has that type of authority. That's why Yahweh said, agree with thine adversary. You have many Israelites resisting arrest and fighting and screaming, talk about Yahweh. Meanwhile, they got the fringes on. Okay? Which is stupid. Okay? Now you're in jail. Now you're in a position, you got to call your baby mama. Okay? You can't pick your child up from school. You may miss work. All because you weren't in order. You weren't keeping the law. Meanwhile, you got fringes on. It says, for the authorities, all right, that are set up in the form of Rome, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Medials, the Persian Empire, the Greeks, the Romans, they were authorities set up by the Most High. Okay? The Lord is the one. Promotion comes from the Lord. It says the authorities are God's servants sent for your good. All right, because these captivities have to be in play in order for prophecy to come to pass, in order for the kingdom to come. It says, but if you are doing wrong, of course you should be afraid, for they have the power to punish you. They are God's servants, all right, sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do wrong. Okay, and what's that, Psalms 125? Okay, let's get that. Let's get Psalms 125 real quick. And we'll get some history as well. Psalms 125:3, for the rod of the wicked shall not rest upon a lot of the righteous, lest the righteous put forth their hands unto iniquity. There's suffering for righteousness' sake, and there's suffering for wickedness' sake. Do good, O Yahweh, unto those that be good, and to them that are upright in their hearts. As for such as turn aside unto their crooked ways, Yahweh shall lead them forth with the workers of iniquity, but peace shall be upon Israel. Okay? So the Heavenly Father is the one who set up these particular governors, all right, and governments and rulers. Okay? He's the one who set these people up. All right? It says, so you must submit to them not only to avoid punishment, but to keep a clear conscience, because ultimately you can do something to have the ministry blamed. Pay your taxes too. See, pay your taxes too. For these same reasons, for government workers need to be paid. Okay? They are serving the Most High in what they do. So even Esau is serving the Lord because ultimately he set him up to rule. So this is why Paul wrote this. And when you understand the history of this very reason he's writing this, Romans 13, in Romans 13, was there rebellions going on amongst the Jews surrounding Roman taxes? Is this why Paul wrote this letter? Yes. The historical backdrop of Romans 13 suggests Paul was addressing a very real tension among Jews. All right. And the Christians were Jews that followed Yahweh Shai. So they were a sect, a camp amongst the Jews. All right. But they had a different way of handling things. They had a different order than these Jews of the zealots and so forth, right? It says, There was many tensions among Jews in Rome over taxes and submission to Roman authority. A history of Jews in unrest in the Roman Empire, which is the fourth beast in Daniel, the 7th chapter. All right. In the decades before Paul wrote Romans, around AD 57, there had been frequent Jewish revolts and tax resistance in various provinces. One well-known flashpoint was the tribute tax to Caesar. All right. Many Jews saw paying it as betrayal to the Most High's kingship. In AD 6, a man named Judas of Galilee led a revolt in Judea when Rome introduced a census for taxation. And we have the census today. All right. And it all comes from Rome. All right. It says his movement, the Zealots, which the Sicarii were an off branch of the Zealots. So showing you that that whole movement was never rooted in Yahushua, but you all followed it. You dudes are simple, man. Okay? And you all still got blood on your hands because y'all haven't rejected it. Y'all haven't said that no, we were wrong for starting this movement. Y'all still doubling down. And just because y'all split off and went into these different names, y'all still carrying the same doctrine, the same mindset, and y'all are confusing the flock under the guise of being followers of Yahushua. Followers of Yahushua were ordered not to do all of the stuff that the Sicarii did. Okay? It says, Judas the Galilean led a revolt in Judea when Rome introduced a census for taxation. All right. His movement, the Zealots, taught that paying tribute to Rome was disloyal to God. All right. Now, the Sicarii themselves, they didn't so much rebel over taxes. I mean, you may have a few of them that did, but their gripe was more so, the Romans shouldn't be ruling over us. And, pretty much people of the circumcision, Jews who sold out, all right, they will stab them up, all right, but they did fight against the Romans, and eventually they lost. Okay, it says this no taxes to Caesar sentiment didn't die out. It lingered amongst the Jews in their communities throughout the empire. Rome's suspicion of the Jews in their communities. All right. In AD 49, Emperor Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome over disturbances connected to a figure called Christus, all right, which is, Yahushua. And you can go into the writings of, secular writings, secular history of, Roman, all right, poets and writers and historians that talked about the followers of Yahushua. So there's his secular history about Yahushua and his followers written by verified historians. All right. It says, by the time Paul writes Romans, Jews were back in the city, but Roman authorities still view them with suspicion, especially regarding loyalty to taxes. So this is why Paul wrote Romans, the 13th chapter. He didn't write it to tell them that whatever the government says you got to do it. Even if it says you bow to idols, even if it says, all right, to inoculate yourself with this juice, even if it said take a chip. That ain't what he's saying. And this is what many of these, all right, pastors are going to do. Okay? Why Paul addresses this in Romans 13. Some Jews believed in believers in the Roman churches may still have held a anti-tax, anti-Roman sentiment from the old zealot ideology. And certain zealots repented and became followers of Yahushua, but they still held to that mindset. It came out. Okay? Paul tells believers to submit to governing authorities, paying taxes and honoring officials, not because Rome was righteous, but because God permits governments, all right, for order. There you go. For prophecy's sake. So how are you going to fight against Rome when Daniel, the 7th chapter, told you was going to be up under the Roman captivity? That doesn't make sense. Where in prophecy was it said that we were going to win by the sword? And then when we get on these guys about going out to the camps with guns and all of these various different things, which are not wicked to have for having a gun, but to, tie it to the ministry and go out to camp with it, it's not wise. Y'all say that we're scared. Well, my thing is, well, nigga, if you so much of a badass, go and do what the Sakari and the Zealots really did. You're not going to do that. All right? But you don't want to uplift Yahweh Shai. His goal was partly to keep the church from being swept into political rebellion, which could harm its witness and bring unnecessary persecution. So Paul is writing Romans, the 13th chapter, surrounding this. Okay? Surrounding this, man. Okay? And there's a dude, yeah, Judas, this Judas guy. I believe, boom, there you go. Gamaliel's counsel. Yeah, it's in this chapter. Acts 15 and 36. Some time ago, there was a fellow Judas who pretended, let's see here, who pretended to be someone great. About 400 others joined him, but he was killed and all his followers went their various ways. The whole movement came to nothing. The same thing is happening with these guys today. They raise themselves up to be something, opposing themselves, talking all, and then it doesn't work out. And then the dudes just go and change the t-shirt, all right, and try to act like they different, man. Weirdos, man. After him, at the time of the taxing, okay, after this man rose up Judas of Galilee in the days of the taxing and drew away much people after him, he also perished, all right, and all, even as many as obeyed him, were dispersed. NLT, after him, at the time of the census, there was Judas of Galilee. He got people to follow him, but he was killed too, and his followers were scattered. See? So my advice is leave these men alone. Leave the followers of Yahweh Shai alone. Let them go. If they're planning to do these things merely on their own, it will soon be overthrown. But it is of the Most High, it will not be overthrown. And ye may even find yourselves fighting against the Most High, because many of these, Jews will put in hell on the church. But I just wanted to get into that because this is basically what Paul is talking about, man. Okay? Pay your taxes too in Romans 13 and 6 for these same reasons, man. Even verse 7, he says, render therefore to all their duties. Now, what did Yahweh Shai say? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So Paul is basically passing down the same order that Yahweh Shai passed down when they were trying to trip him up. Okay? Romans 13 and 7. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute unto whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, and fear for whom fear, honor from whom is honor. Okay? So no, we don't have the right to go out and rebel against the Roman authorities. We don't have the right to go out and form a military and try to ultimately rebel against Esau ruling right now, because he's going to rule until the Lord takes him down. The power that we have, okay, is spiritual. Okay? The book of 2 Corinthians 10 and 4. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and everything that exalted itself against the knowledge of the Most High, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Yahweh Shai, man. See that? And having a readiness to revenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. All right? And after you have become fully obedient, all right, those who are meant to be judged will get judged, man. But again, as the scriptures say, we have to strive lawfully. Okay? And Yahweh Shai gave clear instructions to his church, man. We are not to fight against the authorities in place. And that Romans, the 13th chapter, wasn't written to say, well, anything that the government says, you got to follow it. That's not what that meant. All right? We follow the law of the land until ultimately there's going to come a point where particular laws we're going to have to say no. Now, does that mean we're fighting against the government? No, that means ultimately we're obeying Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. He told us not to bow to the beast, his image, and take his mark. Right? 2 Timothy 2:5. If a man also strive for the masteries, yet he is not crowned, except he strive lawfully. Okay? And the zealots didn't strive lawfully. That's why they lost. That's why the Sicarii ended up turning on each other, fighting, breaking up, and committing suicide in the temple. And for you to come back and take on that legacy shows you're just not wise. That's why the guys who left off from Sicarii call themselves Masada. Well, you know what happened in Masada? So you dudes are just very, you're reprobate. Okay? You're reprobate. And that's what you get for following, all right, that garbage pail kid. If you don't know what a garbage pail is, kid, you know, you got to be an 80s baby to understand that. The word for lawfully is namemos. Okay? Lawfully agreeable to the law. Okay? And ultimately, Yahweh Shai gave laws, man. Okay? Of the Christian religion, the law demanding faith, moral instructions given by Yahweh Shai. Okay? Again, agree, like it says here, agree. And I got to roll out. Matthew 5:25. Agree with thine adversary quickly when thou art in the way of him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and you be cast into prison. So you got these guys with fringes on getting pulled over and crashing out. Yahweh Shai gave a simple instruction and command for that, man. But hopefully I'll edify on to the next. Shalom.